Everyone's good? Thumbs up? Awesome. Well, thanks for attending. Do you mind if I get a snapshot photo of this awesome crowd? I love BodyPower Expo. This is my first year here. Okay. You guys are all awesome. It's been an amazing experience. So I'd like to thank the organizers as well as all you guys for coming out and supporting this. It gets bigger and bigger every year. So today I'm going to just be talking about 8 rules for maximum muscle. So building muscle, mainly nutrition rules is what we'll be talking about. Now, these are not gospel, but these are just things that I have found to work. Some of it is based on research. Some of it's based on real world application, what we find working in the kitchen and in the gym. So I've been interested in building muscle probably most of my life. This is me at 11 years old in my parents' backyard. Been training consistently since even before this photo was taken. So I've always wondered, how do you build muscle bigger and faster and leaner? And I spent so much time in the gym as a child. I started competing in bodybuilding as a teenager, and when I was in college as an undergrad, continually learning exercise science until I went on and got a doctoral, did my doctoral work at the University of Connecticut, and then went on to do my postdoc at Yale School of Medicine, where I studied how exercise and diet actually affected genes. And you know, everything that we do when we exercise and the things that we eat, they actually turn on and off genes. So, you know, I mean, that's really where exercise science is heading, and understanding how that affects your body is really the key to nutrition and training. And now at 45 years old, I'm still continually searching. For those of you who are familiar with my shortcut to shred, but still looking in the lab, in the gym, and in my own kitchen on how to maximize muscle, make it bigger, stronger, faster, and even get leaner. So the first rule is focus on protein. You know, it's very simple. Muscle is made up of protein, or more specifically, the amino acids that make up protein, make up muscle. So as most of you know, protein is basically a string of amino acids. If you think of a pearl necklace, each one of those pearls is an amino acid. That long string altogether is the protein. And when we ingest protein, whether it's whey protein, whether it's beef, we break down those individual amino acids. Sometimes they stay together in groups of 2 or 3. Sometimes they break down by themselves. That's what gets absorbed in the intestine, eventually gets to the muscle. And then this is a very simplified paradigm, but basically the amino acids get into the muscle, increases muscle synthesis, we have muscle breakdown continually going on. So the real key to muscle growth is when we can get muscle synthesis greater than muscle breakdown. And one of the ways to do that is to eat more protein. How much protein? Somewhere around 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, or about 2 to 3 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, a lot of dietitians who are not sports nutritionists and doctors will tell you, oh, well, that's way too much protein, it's bad for your kidneys. A, it's not bad for your kidneys, and B, it is important. And they'll also say, oh, well, you know, there's no research that shows that will help to build muscle. And actually there is. And more recently, we're really beginning to show this in the research. So there are several studies out there showing that when subjects consume about 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight, again, somewhere around 3 grams per kilogram, they gain more lean muscle and strength than those who are consuming about 0.5 to 0.75 grams per pound. However, there's also several studies that show that there's really no difference in subjects eating more protein, whether it's a control group who is a lower protein and a high protein group, or if you take someone on a lower protein diet and put them on a higher protein diet, they don't build more muscle due to the more protein. So the nutritionists and doctors that say, well, you don't need more protein, they're hanging their hats on those studies and ignoring the studies that do show. So why is there this big difference? Well, there's a recent review from the University of Utah that found what we call the protein spread theory and the protein change theory. Now, what does that mean? Well, to sort of simplify it, it means they looked at all the research studies and they found that when there was a protein spread between the low protein group and the high protein group of an average of a 60% greater protein intake than the control group, then they saw that the higher protein gained more muscle. So the problem with some of the studies, the earlier studies showing that higher protein did not increase muscle, was because there wasn't a big enough difference between what they considered the low protein group and what they considered the high protein group. And then there's also what they call the protein change theory, and that's per individual. So what they found is when you take an individual and put them on a high protein diet, for them to see a difference in muscle growth with a higher protein diet, it has to be a change of at least 30% greater from what they were consuming. The studies that used less than a 30% increase did not show that there was a greater increase in muscle growth with high protein. So we're basically saying that yes, you can increase muscle by consuming more protein along with a resistance training program, as long as you're eating enough. And what they have found is somewhere around the 1 gram per kilogram or 2 grams, 1 gram per pound, or about 2 grams per kilogram, and up to 1.5 grams per pound or 3 grams per kilogram is sort of the sweet spot for what's working to build muscle. Rule number 2 is to count carbohydrates for building muscle. Now with carbohydrates, they're important, obviously. They're an important energy source. During weight training, especially bodybuilding type training where you're doing higher reps, lower rest periods between sets, you burn up a lot of glycogen, which is stored in the muscle. Glycogen is just a storage form of carbohydrates, to really simplify it. And we burn through that. So you need to replenish that source. Having more glycogen pulls more water into the muscle, keeps the muscles fuller. And there's even research showing that when a muscle is fuller, it places a stretch on the muscle membrane. And that stretch on the membrane, almost like filling a balloon, like a water balloon, that stretch signals receptors on the membrane to increase protein synthesis because they want to build the muscle bigger because there's more volume. So having more glycogen in your muscle can help in the long run to actually build more muscle protein. That's just one of the important things. Plus, having more glycogen means you're able to train harder, especially when you're doing higher reps and lower rest periods. How many grams of carbs? Well, that really depends on where the individual is at when they're starting a mass-gaining diet. Somewhere, generally speaking, around 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight, maybe 3 to 4 grams per kilogram is right around where you want to sort of start off at. Now, if this is someone who was only consuming 1 gram per kilogram of body weight and suddenly wanted to start building more mass, you would not jump right up to 3. You would start them off maybe at 1.5 grams per kilogram and see how they tolerate that, and then slowly work yourself up. Someone who's already eating a high carbohydrate diet, you'd probably start somewhere around the 2 grams, maybe even needing to go higher, 2 grams per pound or 4 grams per kilogram, even up to 6 grams per kilogram or higher, depending on how well they tolerate carbohydrates. Some people are more carb sensitive and others gain more body fat. Others can tolerate carbohydrates, so it's all about the individual and finding what works for them. Speaking of particular carbohydrate sources, now I like fruit at certain times of day, one of them being pre-workout, because because fruit obviously is a slow digesting carb, depending on the fruit. Most fruits are a slow digesting carbohydrate. An apple is somewhere on the GI, the glycemic index, in the 30s or 40s. So it's a nice low glycemic carb. When you consume this before a workout, you keep insulin levels low. And since when insulin levels spike, you can have a decrease in fat oxidation or fat burning. So one way to get carbs before you work out and not interfere with fat burning during the workout, if that is your concern, is to eat a slower digesting carbohydrate. That way you have fuel without inhibiting fat burning. And fat burning is important because that'll also extend your endurance and allow you to train harder for longer. Now, the other thing I like about apples is the fact that most fruit is 50% fructose, 50% glucose. Now, glucose is what our blood sugar is. That's the main sugar our body recognizes and uses. So the reason that an apple is slow, what we call low glycemic, is the fructose doesn't go right into the bloodstream and get used by the muscles. The glucose does. The fructose has to go to the liver. At the liver, it then gets stored as glycogen, just like we store it in the muscle, and then the liver adjusts how much the body needs of that fructose by sending it out as glucose. That's why it's a slow digesting or low glycemic carb, but you also get a little bit of the glucose for an immediate energy source. Not so much that you're spiking your blood glucose levels and your insulin levels, but just enough so you're getting a little immediate energy, but then you also have a nice longer lasting energy to last you throughout the workout. The other thing we're finding out about apples are the micronutrients. Fruit obviously contains antioxidants and other micronutrients, or what we call phytonutrients. One of them being polyphenols, which are in apple. The polyphenols in apple have been found to enhance strength and fat loss as well. So it's a nice carb to have pre-workout. There's certainly nothing wrong with having oatmeal as well, or other slow digesting carbs. Now, post-workout, I recommend gummy bears to a lot of people, or pixie sticks, and people think I'm crazy. Absolutely insane to be recommending sugar, because we know sugar is absolutely evil and will kill you, right? You'll become diabetic from eating gummy bears. Well, the reason I specifically recommend gummy bears is most gummy bears, like Haribo, use a higher amount of glucose versus fructose in their formula. So it uses dextrose, which is just another name for glucose, basically. It'll use maltodextrin, which is just a bunch of glucose molecules bound together. Very fast digesting carb as well. It'll also use corn syrup, and people are like, oh, corn syrup is bad. High fructose corn syrup is bad. Corn syrup by itself is mainly glucose. So if you see corn syrup, it's a good thing. Why do you want that glucose right after you work out? Well, like I said, you've just burned your muscle glycogen. You've used up that muscle glycogen. The best way to replenish it, as we have found, is immediately after your workout, somewhere in the 30, 45-minute range is the best time to get fast digesting carbs, particularly focusing on glucose or those other forms like maltodextrin and corn syrup, which provide glucose in a different form. Even though those are complex carbohydrates, they break apart immediately in the digestive system and act like simple glucose. So that's why I recommend things like gummy bears post-workout. Rule number 3 is don't forget about fats. Now, fats are absolutely critical. Fat used to be the other F word, if you will. Back in the day, at least in the States, the government had a war on fat. All fat was bad. They told you to watch out for salmon because it's a high-fat fish. They told you to don't eat the peanuts on when you fly because it's high-fat snack. They warned you about avocados because avocados were a high-fat fruit. Well, now we're realizing, wait a minute, these things have what we call healthy fats, and in some of these foods, essential fats. Essential fats, meaning we have to get these from our diet. If we're eating a low-fat diet, well, guess what? We're not getting enough essential fats. That's a very, very bad thing. Even sources, I'm showing the egg here because everyone thinks the egg yolk is bad and you should only eat egg whites, but even saturated fat is important, particularly for males. You want to make sure you get your omega-3 fats. You want to make sure you get your monounsaturated fats. So your omega-3s are what you get mainly from fatty fish like salmon. You can supplement with a fish oil. Monounsaturated fats are things you get from nuts. Olive oil is another good source of monounsaturated fat. And peanuts, or if you like, peanut butter. Peanut butter is actually an okay food source because the fat is a healthy fat. Do not fall for the low-fat peanut butter. That's the last thing you want to do because they replace the fat basically with carbohydrates, with sugar. So stick with regular peanut butter. It's a great source of monounsaturated fats. How much fat? I typically recommend about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight in fat per day. It seems like a lot, but this is really critical, particularly for males, because what we find with athletes, male athletes who are consuming a higher fat diet with higher intakes of both saturated fat and monounsaturated fat, is that they maintain higher testosterone levels, particularly when they're training hard, and we all train hard, so, right? So getting in saturated fat, that's why I'm showing butter here. Butter really is not a bad source in moderation. You do need some saturated fat. Peanut butter for the monounsaturated fat, and the salmon for the omega-3, those essential fatty acids. So do not forget about fat. That's one of the most critical, I would say after protein, the most critical element is really fat. The most critical macronutrient in your diet is fat. There's essential amino acids and there's essential fats, but there are no essential carbohydrates because our liver and our kidneys both can convert protein and fat into the glucose that our body needs. So there are no essential carbohydrates. So that's why most of my diets focus on getting ample amount of protein, ample amounts of fat, and then what we do is we manipulate the carbohydrates, either going up or down based on what the person's goal is and how well they tolerate carbohydrates. Rule number 4 is consider your calories. Now, I've talked about protein, I've talked about carbohydrates, and I've talked about fats. As long as you're hitting all those numbers, you really don't need to be worried about your calorie intake. However, obviously calorie balance is important whether you want to gain muscle or whether you want to lose muscle. For building muscle, you're better off being in calorie excess. Now, how much does that come out to be? Well, if you're getting in a gram to a gram and a half or 2 to 3 grams per kilogram in protein, and then 2 to 4 grams of, or 3 to 4 grams per kilogram of carbs, and about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight for fat, you should be somewhere around 35, 40, maybe 42 calories per kilogram of body weight. Most of us, that should be close to maintenance depending on how much training we do and the type of training. It should put us just over our maintenance needs. Now, again, this is very simplified in general. Everybody is an individual that you have to consider, but these are all good starting points. For those who can tolerate more calories, then you bump up the carbohydrates and it brings them up over 44 calories, maybe even up to 46 calories per kilogram of body weight. But as long as you're hitting those macros, your calories will follow, as we said. So don't worry too much about calories, which is why I have them placed number 4 here, focusing more on those macronutrients, the protein, the fat, and the carbohydrates. Rule number 5 is dairy does good. Dairy protein, particularly what I'm talking about here is milk, is 20% whey, 80% casein. Whey protein is what we call the fast digesting or soluble protein, and casein is the slower digested protein. The casein protein literally forms a clot in the stomach. It forms these micelles, and then the digestive enzymes literally have to peel away the amino acids like you're peeling away at an onion, and it lasts, as you can see in this diagram now. Here the whey is the triangles, the circles are the casein protein. When you take whey, you get this immediate big bump in amino acids, and this one is leucine. Leucine, we know, is the most critical anabolic amino acid. When you take whey protein, in less than 1 hour, it's already spiked the amino acids into you. So most of it's been digested. You get that big, ample spike there. With casein protein, it still goes up quick, but then it just kind of stays nice and steady. And what we have found now is that combining both whey, a fast digesting, and casein, the slow digesting, or just taking a milk protein, it could be milk or it could be milk protein isolate, which is going to give you both of those. Or you can mix a whey with a casein protein individually or buy a mixed protein that already has them in there. Actually produces better gains in muscle mass when taking it around workouts than just whey alone. Because with the whey, as you see here, you get a big blip, but then it drops. With the casein, it maintains. And now, if we were to call this protein synthesis, the rate of protein synthesis, which is the main way the muscle grows, follows a similar trend. With whey, you get a quick boost of protein synthesis, but then it doesn't last very long. The casein, you also get a boost of protein synthesis, but then the casein protein maintains that protein synthesis for longer. It maintains a longer anabolic environment for the body, and research has shown that yes, it actually helps to maintain not only protein synthesis, but actually helps athletes gain more muscle in the long run. Now, like I said, there's a number of ways that you could combine whey and casein. You could buy a whey protein and combine it with the casein protein yourself. Maybe a 1-to-1 blend there. You could buy a premix. This has whey, casein, it also has egg protein. Egg protein is somewhere in the middle on the digestion scale of whey and casein. Right around the middle, makes a nice bridge. Soy is the same thing. Soy is a middle or medium digesting protein that makes a nice bridge there. Another way is to just buy whey and mix it in milk. Milk is, like I said, it's 80% casein. So even though you're getting some whey, it's mainly casein. So a great way to get that whey casein combo is just to mix your protein shake in milk. Or if you like Greek yogurt, a really nice treat is to take whey protein, take your favorite flavor whey protein, mix it in Greek yogurt. You could also eat your whey with with cottage cheese. Cottage cheese is another great source of casein because most of the whey has been drained. That's why Greek yogurt as well. Greek yogurt is a drained yogurt. It drains off most of the whey, which leaves mainly casein. And then cheese. Cheese also is the same thing. We basically get whey from cheese manufacturing. They actually filter out the whey from the cheese and use mainly the casein during cheese production. So if you like cheese, have a whey protein shake with some cheese for your casein. Either way you do it, combining those is the best way for muscle growth. Rule number 6 is look for leucine. Like I said, leucine is the most critical anabolic amino acid. Leucine is a branched chain amino. We've all heard of branched chain amino acids, right? So the 3 branched chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Of those three, leucine is really the more critical when it comes at least to muscle growth. For energy, actually valine can be the more important one, but for muscle growth, leucine. That's why with valine, you get more energy. That's why I typically recommend not just taking leucine by itself, but taking a branched chain amino acid so that you get the other two branch chains. But leucine is very critical because leucine gets immediately into the muscle, and then just like a key in an ignition, it literally turns on muscle protein synthesis. As we see, most of you have heard of mTOR. I won't bore you with the biochemistry, but then leucine actually directly turns on, activates this complex that we call mTOR. That activates other complexes that then ramp up muscle protein synthesis. Leucine is absolutely critical. Protein synthesis is just stringing along amino acids. Like I said, here's your pearl necklace. Each one of these pearls is an amino acid, and this long chain makes up your protein. This is happening right inside the muscle cell. It's building up its muscle protein so that the muscle can get bigger. And again, just to keep it simple, I'm not going to go through all the biochemistry, but leucine is critical for this process, muscle protein synthesis, which then leads to muscle growth. Now, what some of the research has found, and this is very early, look, you got to remember with the research, it's confusing. I know it is because we're always changing what works and what doesn't work and what we're finding, but that's what science is. It's about uncovering what's the best way and finding that, oh, you know what, that was sort of right, but now we're getting a little closer to understanding what's going on. With leucine, right now, there's evidence that shows you need a good 3 to 4 grams of leucine to increase muscle protein synthesis enough to where you're getting a good bump to help with muscle growth. Now, that doesn't mean you need to take a branched chain amino acid or a leucine supplement. You could get that from food. What would that take in food to get from leucine? Well, if you're going to eat beef, it would take you 7 to 8 ounces or 200 to 230 grams of beef to get those 3 to 4 grams of leucine. So anytime you're going to have steak for dinner, that's the number you want to shoot for so that you get enough leucine to get a nice spike in muscle protein synthesis from that meal. Anytime you're eating chicken, again, these numbers vary just slightly. Chicken, because it has a little less fat, has a little higher protein content. So slightly lower on the chicken, 6 to 7 ounces per meal, or 170 to 200 grams of chicken will get you that 3 to 4 grams of leucine. With fish, somewhere around another 7 to 8 ounces, or 200 to 230 grams. Same for pork. Eggs, it would take you 6 to 7 whole eggs. One whole egg has about 6 grams of protein. Egg whites have about 4. So if you're eating egg whites with some yolks, you would need even more, but it would take 6 to 7 whole eggs. For milk, almost a liter of milk to get 3 to 4 grams of leucine. So anytime that you're in whey protein, about 30 grams. And one scoop typically has somewhere between 20 to 25. So you need a little more than a scoop, about a scoop and a half of whey protein to get enough leucine to spike protein synthesis. And with casein, you need 35 grams. So if you ever have a meal where you're only eating, let's say, 100 grams of beef, right? It's a snack, you're just having 100 grams of beef. Well, that's when I would recommend actually supplementing with some branch chains with that meal to make sure that you get enough of the leucine to help increase the protein synthesis, turn that meal into better muscle growth. Rule number 7 is that timing tends to matter. Now, the 2 most critical times are pre and post workout when it comes to sports nutrition. as well as waking up. Now this is just the meal plan for my shortcut to size on bodybuilding.com. In here, there's a couple ways that you can do your morning. You can either go with a separate breakfast, 2 breakfasts, one being a whey protein with some branch chains and then some fruit. Or you can just combine the whey protein with the breakfast, and then in this case, if you combine whey with the eggs and then the low-fat American cheese and the eggs, making scrambled eggs with cheese, now you're getting your fast-digesting whey, you're getting your medium-digesting egg protein, and you're getting your slow-digesting casein from the cheese. And then nighttime, I typically recommend getting a slower digesting protein to help throughout the night. There is some newer research showing that when they do give casein protein later in the day than those that are getting it early in the morning, that they do lead to greater gains in muscle mass. And then here's just the pre and post workout to show you a quick snapshot of one way you could do your pre and post workout with whey protein, adding, because it's only a scoop of whey protein giving you about somewhere 20 to 25 grams of protein. You could simply bump up the whey protein to maybe 2 scoops, add some branch chains or not, leave those out if you're going with more than a scoop. But also you want to consider getting your creatine pre-workout. Beta-alanine and betaine are some other supplements that I recommend both pre and post-workout due to the fact that they help to increase muscle strength and power, and that muscle, what we call strength endurance, the ability to maintain strength later in the workout. That's the more critical factor. And with beta-alanine, there was a recent study showing with boxers that those supplementing with beta-alanine were able to maintain punching power in later rounds than when they weren't supplementing with beta-alanine. And that's critical. Having that power and strength later on means that you're able to get more reps on those later sets, and that really could be critical for building more muscle. And then the last rule is find what works for your body. You know, there's a million body types, and we all have our individual biochemistry, and that's the real key thing. So, you know what? None of these rules might even work for your body. You can use this as a starting point, but then maybe you want to try something like intermittent fasting. Maybe you want to try, maybe some of you heard carb backloading or other strategies. But the point is to take the advice that experts like myself are giving and not just digest it and go, oh, well, that's what Jim Stoppani said I should do. If that's not working for you, then maybe that's just not, it's wrong for your body. It might be right for the majority of the people, but everyone is unique. It's amazing the way that people react to training programs and diets. You can have 99% of the people who react one way, and then you get 1% of the people who have the exact opposite reaction to a training program and a diet. How is that so? Well, everyone has an individual biochemistry. So you really need to listen to your body. Use this advice as you will, but always try to find what works best for you. Whether the scheduling doesn't work for you, then you need to come up with something that works better. Look, even if the diet is working and it's just impossible for you to follow, well, then that's not the right. Maybe you are a nurse who works, 12-hour shifts, or you're a police officer, whatever it is. You just can't have these meals at certain times of the day. Well, then you need to find something that works for your schedule and your body. And that's really what the key is finding out, take all the advice that's out there. Think about it. Try different diets. Try different training programs. And even the ones that are working, you might still want to try others because change is always good. change is always good, and you never know what you're going to find may work better. And eventually, as you've tried these all, you're going to start gaining this knowledge on how your body reacts, and you're going to be better able to create your own nutrition plan and your own training plans. And I mean, that's really what I try to do, is not just teach people and say, do this, do that. I'm trying to teach people how to find what works for their body and give them this advice that they can then use and find what works. So this didn't work, that didn't work, and then learn themselves what all this nutrition advice is and then how to employ it in their own body. So that's about all I have. I don't think this is a good forum for questions since we don't have a mic to go around, but what I'll do is I'll stop the talk. Now, what time is it? We've got about 15 minutes, so if you guys want to come up, we've got about 15 minutes, and I can take Q&As here for about 15, and then if we want to go longer, we can go outside. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time.